Our next speaker, Vanessa Davidson, received her BA in Hispano-American Literature from Harvard University and spent a year studying Latin American and pre-Columbian art at the Universidad de Buenos Aires in Argentina. She has worked at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston on the pre-Columbian and Spanish colonial collections, and also at the Metropolitan Museum of Art on the groundbreaking exhibition, The Colonial Andes, Tapestries and Silverwork, 1530 to 1830. Vanessa was awarded a Fulbright Hays Fellowship to conduct dissertation research in Argentina and Brazil in 2009. And in 2011, she completed her PhD in 20th century Latin American art history from the Institute of Fine Arts of NYU. Her dissertation was titled Paulo Bruschi and Edgardo Antonio Vigo, Pioneers in Alternate Communication Networks, Conceptualism and Performance, 1960s to 1980s. And she, like Delia Solomons, attests to the fact that at these symposia, we pride ourselves and enjoy tremendously the input of the new scholars in the field, as well as the very seasoned ones who help us organize it and crown it. Since 2011, Vanessa has worked as Shawn and Joe Lampe Curator of Latin American Art at the Phoenix Art Museum, and she will talk to us about that collection this afternoon. Please give a warm welcome to Vanessa Davidson.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and also for the invitation to participate in this wonderful event this afternoon. I would also like to thank Samantha for coordinating all the details of my travel here and for putting me so nicely in a beautiful hotel that's close to the subway. The history of the collection, excuse me, let me begin in this way. In 2009, the Phoenix Art Museum celebrated its 50th anniversary. The museum was founded in 1959, so it is quite a young collection by New York standards. And the history of the collection of the Phoenix Art Museum is a history of reliance on the generosity of donors, because we have not historically had, nor do we currently have, acquisition funds for the purchase of artworks. And as one of the Board of Trustees members, Richard Goldsmith, quipped soon after the museum was founded, quote, "We are one of the few museums that became a museum first and the art came later." And this is an apt description of one of the foundational idiosyncrasies of the Phoenix Art Museum. But over the past 60 years, we have built a solid permanent collection of 17,878 artworks, collected piece by piece, primarily through donations, and we now have 200,000 square feet of exhibition space and 7 curatorial departments, including Asian, Western and American, European, photography, fashion design, modern and contemporary, and Latin American. And because we have lacked funds slated for acquisitions, the tastes of our donors have fundamentally shaped the Phoenix Art Museum's permanent collection. And this is especially true with regard to the collection of Latin American art. Because for 33 years, from the museum's founding in 1959 until 1992, the museum was without a Latin American art department, much less a Latin American art curator. So for the first 33 years of the museum's existence, the Latin American art collection was somewhat akin to a rudderless boat. There was no clear vision or direction that the collection might grow into, with the exception of a persistent emphasis on Mexico, due to the fact that the majority of our donors traveled just south of the border from Arizona to Mexico and generally did not train their vision further south. And this has not necessarily been a disadvantage for the Phoenix Art Museum, primarily due to the high caliber of works of Mexican art that have been donated to the museum over the past 60 years. And over those years, our Latin American art collection has grown to include 965 objects, which were collected through donations primarily from 2 distinct groups that represent 2 distinct spheres of influence. The first are the local donors that I mentioned, who often traveled to Mexico bringing back works for the museum's collection. And included within this group of Mexican art donors is a group called the Friends of Mexican Art, or FOMA, which was founded in 1963 and which has been essential in providing us with the cornerstones of our Mexican art collection over the past 50 years. The second sphere of influence arose in the mid-1990s, and that was when Mr. and Mrs. Diana and Bruce Halley began forming a formidable collection of Latin American art on their own. And from the start, Mr. and Mrs. Halley have had a much more expanded, comprehensive view of what it means to collect art from Latin America, collecting works by artists from Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Cuba, Peru, Venezuela, as well as Mexico. So what I propose to do this afternoon is to give you an overarching view of Latin American exhibitions at the museum, to give you a sense of where we began and where we are going, and also to reflect the influence of these two distinct spheres of influence that I mentioned. And this will also illustrate how the collection began with an almost exclusive emphasis on Mexico, but has grown in recent decades to include a much more expansive vision of art from Latin America, treating our audiences to a more comprehensive view of the tumultuous variety of art created in Latin America in the 20th century and into the 21st. Gifts of Mexican art arrived in the museum's collection before it opened its doors in 1957 and 58. And the first gifts came from Mr. and Mrs. Orm Lewis. And Orm Lewis was a lawyer in Phoenix who was active in business, politics, and public service. And he and his wife gave us our first Mexican works, such as David Elfo Siqueiros' Apocalypse, Diego Rivera's Seated Nudes with Raised Arms, otherwise known as a portrait of Frida Kahlo from 1930, another Rivera drawing, a 1917 still life, as well as a Roberto Montenegro painting, a still life, which is undated. And the Lewises also gave us our first non-Mexican works in the mid to late 1960s, including a suite of Roberto Mata prints, such as Flambeau of 1964, and Lucio Fontana's Concetto Spaziale A, or Spatial Concept A, from 1968, which apparently everyone had forgotten that we had until I discovered it in storage soon after arriving at the museum. And the Lewises continued their gift-giving in the 1970s with more Mexican works, such as José Luis Cuevas' self-portrait of 1952, Rafael's masterful pastel Personaje of 1969, Francisco Zúñiga drawings of women from 1968 and 1973, as well as our first Carlos Mérida gouaches from the late 1930s, and our first Rufino Tamayo print, a Mixografía Hombre Rojo of 1976. So as you can see, Mr. and Mrs. Lewis effectively gave us a very limited but substantial foundation upon which to continue to build a collection of Latin American art, primarily focusing on Mexico. And in the midst of the Lewis's generous gift-giving came another very important gift, a work that, since it was gifted to the museum, has become the single most often requested work for loan out of all the objects in the museum's entire collection. And this is, of course, Frida Kahlo's Suicide of Dorothy Hale of 1939. And the donor of this portrait was Claire Booth Luce, who was a playwright and a friend of Dorothy Hale, who had commissioned Kahlo to paint a picture of her friend, hoping for a portrait. And she was so horrified when she received this cinematic slow-motion tumble of simultaneous narration in which we see Dorothy Hale jump, we see her fall, and we see her meet her gory end on the pavement below. She was so horrified by this that she wanted to destroy the painting. Luckily, some of her friends convinced her only to paint out the part of the painting that identified her as the commissioner of the work, and she tucked it away in a closet for 20 years before giving it to the Phoenix Art Museum in 1960. And over the years since she gave us this gift, it has become the icon of our Latin American art collection. Another landmark moment for the formation of the Latin American art collection at the Phoenix Art Museum arose in 1965, when Mr. and Mrs. Denison Kitchell began giving us our first works of Spanish colonial art. And the Kitchells traveled extensively throughout Mexico, bringing back wonderful works of art, such as this 18th century ropero, or wardrobe from Michoacán, which is created in false lacquer, maque fingido, with Asian motifs. They also gave us this portrait of Our Lady the Pilgrim of Quito, which is Mexican of the 18th century, as well as two retratos civiles, or society portraits, this portrait of Doña María Moreno y Buenaventura, and this portrait, the companion piece, Don Juan Mateo Trujillo y Lufo, both of 1760. The Kitchells also gave us this beautiful archangel with a symbol of the Immaculate Conception, which is Mexican as well, from the 1720s. And what's interesting about this piece is that it actually came to the museum as a young woman bearing a basket of fruit, which you see on the right. And when the painting was cleaned, extensive overpainting was discovered. And the decision was made to remove the overpainting, and we were left with this brilliant picture of an archangel holding a well, a symbol of the Immaculate Conception. Quite a surprise. And later, in 1993, the Quichuas also gave us our first Peruvian colonial work, this Divina Pastora, which is late 18th century Cusco school. Now, the mid-1960s were also important for the formation of our Mexican art collection in another regard, because in 1963, as I mentioned, the group, the Friends of Mexican Art was founded, or FOMA was founded. And this was a group of 30 enthusiastic individuals who wanted to encourage interest in Mexican art, cultural and heritage, to strengthen cultural ties with Mexico, and also to stimulate what they called goodwill towards Mexico. Of course, these are the good neighbor years, the tail end of them at any rate. And they did this through a series of lectures and symposia, travel and exhibitions, and most importantly for our purposes, acquisitions. And over the past 50 years that FOMA has been in existence, they have given us the cornerstones of our Mexican art collection, beginning with this Jose Clemente Orozco head, a study for the Man of the Sea, at the mural, the cupola in the Hospicio Cabañas in Guadalajara, which was created between 38 and 39. They follow this gift with a Carlos Mérida, Poma Azul of 1962, which was followed by Arnold Belkin's El Sueño of 1964, Raúl Anguiano's Penitentes of 1963, another Orozco, La Loca, the Crazy Woman of 44, Rufino Tamayo's Variation on a Man 1, 2, and 3, which were created at the Tamarind Lithography Workshop in Los Angeles, where Tamayo had a brief residency in 1964. And they followed this with Francisco Zúñiga's La Puerta y la Ventana, the door and the window, which is a beautiful sculpture which has pride of place at the museum entrance, and because it has become, over the years, an icon of the very institution. And they followed this with a painting by Rufino Tamayo, Dos Figuras en Rojo, which is one of our most popular Mexican paintings, as well as José Luis Cuevas' portrait of critic José Gómez Sicre. And as you know, Gómez Sicre was the chief of the Latin American, the chief of the visual arts section of the Pan American Union in Washington, D.C., and very important for the promotion and diffusion of Latin American art during the post-war period. They also gave us this beautiful Ramos Martinez, a large-scale La Malinche, or Young Girl of Guadalajara, Oaxaca, as well as Javier de la Garza's untitled self-portrait of 1984, Naum Bernabé Senil's Santísima Cena of 1991, and the earliest work in our collection, this beautiful Escudo de Monja, or Nun's Shield, which was created between 1690 and 1710. So as you can see, FOMA's support has been essential in providing us the very cornerstones of our Mexican art collection, from the Mexican muralism represented by Orozco, to the Taller de Gráfica Popular that Anguiano represents, to the Generación de Ruptura that Cuevo represents in the history of Mexican art, to the Nueva Presencia that Belkin initiated, and finally to the Neo-Mexicanismo, or Neo-Mexicanism of Javier de la Garza and Zenil. They have given us representative works of many of the most important artistic currents in Mexico of the 20th century. And FOMA has also been important to the museum in collaborating with us to stage major exhibitions of Mexican art over the years, which underscores both institutions, both FOMA and the Phoenix Art Museum's historical emphasis on Mexican art. And between 1959 and 1992, there were no less than 30 exhibitions of Mexican art held at the museum. And these exhibitions, too, were predicated on the generosity of donors and lenders, because our burgeoning Latin American art collection was not apt for large-scale exhibitions. And of these exhibitions, many were groundbreaking in their day, such as the 1968 Rufino Tamayo retrospective, which was the largest exhibition of Tamayo's works to date in the United States, and it included 124 works from 67 lenders. That was followed in '78 by a Frida Kahlo exhibition, which was also the largest exhibition to date in the US, and included 48 works from 16 lenders. And finally, in 1984, the Diego Rivera, the Cubist Years exhibition, which has been mentioned previously in the symposium, and which was a landmark exhibition because it was the first to explore this facet of Diego Rivera's work, and it included 72 works by 32 lenders. And I tell you about these exhibitions because they serve to illustrate how the Phoenix Art Museum rose to prominence as a center for Mexican art during the 70s and 80s. Indeed, through collaborations with both US and Mexican institutions, it rose into the international stage as one of the key centers for Mexican art in the Southwest. But in 1992, a ground shift occurred. And this was due to a confluence of several key events, beginning with the quincentennial of the discovery of the Americas, the rising tide of multiculturalism, and the changing demographics in Arizona. And in 1992, the museum director, Jim Ballinger, decided that it was time to form a Latin American art department at the museum. And it's important to note that the Phoenix Art Museum had only the second Latin American art department in any museum in the United States. The first was at the Huntington Art Gallery, now the Blanton Museum at the University of Texas at Austin in 1988. So ours was in 1992 and only the second to be founded. And to jumpstart the Latin American art department, Jim tapped into a tremendous resource he already had at his disposal, namely Clayton Kirking, who was then the museum's librarian, but would become the museum's first curator of Latin American art. And Clayton plays the role of a linchpin in this talk. Not only were the first exhibitions of Latin American art beyond Mexico organized under his watch, but he also, and this is of crucial importance, he also was Mrs. Halley's first cultural ambassador to the art of Latin America. And Clayton met Mrs. Halley in 1981 when she was volunteering as a docent and working in the library, and she would later become a member of the Board of Trustees, a position she held for 20 years, becoming the president of the board in 1993. But in the intervening years, she learned about Latin American art through library books in conversation with Clayton. And as she recalls about those years, it was really her role on the museum's board, as well as her friendship with Clayton, whose enthusiasm for Latin American art proved contagious, that sparked in her mind the idea to form her own collection of Latin American art. And the Halley's collecting began in earnest in 1995. And from the start, it was conditioned by the desire that the collected works should inspire new understandings of Latin American art in diverse audiences. And as Mrs. Halley stated in 2013, quote, "As I think back, this desire to have the collection be educational related to the years I spent at the Phoenix Art Museum. In the 90s, we were talking about museum audiences and about the fact that the Hispanic population of Arizona was growing. So I began to think, what does it mean to me to be in this state across the border from Mexico, and by extension, across the border from all of Latin America? What does that mean to me? And how can I make an impact in Arizona where an impact of Latin American art had never been felt?" Another pivotal event in 1995, which was the year Mrs. Halley began her collection, was the exhibition Latin American Women Artists, which has been mentioned previously in the symposium, and it was guest curated by Jerry Biller and organized by the Milwaukee Museum of Art. And this was, of course, the first large-scale exhibition devoted to the role of women in the development of avant-garde art practices in Latin America in the 20th century, and it included over 100 artworks by 35 artists that ranged from Anita Malfatti to Raquel Forner, to Beatriz Gonzalez, to Maria Magdalena Campos Pons, and Jacques Lerner. And it was also accompanied by a very important catalog, the cover of which I'm showing you here, which had essays by very prominent scholars, including Edward Sullivan. And the reason that I bring this, this exhibition up at this juncture is because this exhibition in Phoenix was the first time that Mrs. Halley saw works of art in person that she had only seen previously in library books. And these are works of art by artists such as Mira Schendel, Lydia Clark, Ana Mendieta, and Gego, which she would later collect in great depth. And unfortunately for the nascent Latin American art collection at the department at the Phoenix Art Museum, Clayton left the museum soon after this exhibition closed. But he had played a fundamental role in opening our audience's eyes to the great diversity of art in Latin America beyond Mexico, and also helping to inspire Mrs. Halley's own collecting activities. And the museum, again, was without a curator for 2 years after Clayton's departure until Beverly Adams arrived in 2007, and she continued with great verve. I think you'll recognize someone in the center of that photograph. I thought you would like that, Mari Carmen. Beverly continued with great verve the expansion of the museums and indeed the entire community's understanding of art from Latin America beyond Mexico. And she also forged an alliance with Mrs. Halley that mirrored Clayton's relationship with her. And by now, Mrs. Halley had already laid the foundations for a formidable art collection, and she began lending works to the museum on long-term loan. The first such work was Tungas Cadentis Lacteus, or Milky Fallings of 1994, and the exhibition of these massive steel sculptures in our Great Hall was accompanied by a performance by the artist in which he covered the sculptures with this viscous, white, milky goo, hence the term Milky Fallings. And Mrs. Hawley also began to lend other pieces for long-term loan, some of which she would eventually give to the museum as gifts, such as, for example, Guillermo Cuita's untitled 1989 mattress piece, Doris Salcedo's 1995 untitled sculpture, works by Ana Mendieta, as well as Liliana Porter. And in addition, Mrs. Hawley also generously supported the installation of traveling exhibitions to the museum, such as the landmark 1999 show, Cantos Paralelos, Visual Parody in Contemporary Argentinian Art, which was organized by Maria Carmen Ramirez, and began at the Blanton, traveled to Bogota and the Museo Nacional de Bellas Artes in Buenos Aires before landing in Phoenix. And it contained the works of 9 artists whose works were created between 1960 and 1999. And Mrs. Hawley also, all the while, encouraged the museum to diversify its Latin American art holdings through her advocacy on the acquisitions committee. And indeed, she took the very first steps in diversifying that collection by giving us our very first gifts of work from major contemporary artists outside of Mexico, beginning in 2000 with Jacques Lerner's Todo o Sem, or All the 100s. And this, of course, is a chain of 100 Crusader notes, which not only alludes to the devaluation and instability of the Crusader currency in Brazil in the early 1990s, but the title is also very significant because Todo o Sem, all of the 100s phonetically sounds like todo o sem, all those without in Portuguese. So there's a subtle political twist at play in the title of the work. And Mrs. Hawley also gave us this beautiful Liliana Porter triptych called El Viajero in 1989, which she gave to us in 2009 for the museum's 50th anniversary celebration. And as you know, this is a beautiful work, very large-scale work, which is a meditation on Alice in Wonderland. So from the very start, Mrs. Hawley was conscious of the need to place works in our collection that would buttress our weaknesses, especially in terms of art from South America. And her strategic gift-giving continues until this day. Beverly Adams left the museum in 2001 to become the Hawleys' private curator. And with her tremendous knowledge and array of contacts, the Hawleys' collecting efforts were even more energized, and they added a diverse array of works from disparate time periods and geographies across Latin America, forging one of the most important collections of Latin American art in the United States. And after Beverly's departure, the museum was once again without a curator of Latin American art for 10 years until I arrived in 2011. And during these 10 years, Mrs. Hawley focused on building her own collection with limited involvement with the museum. But once I arrived, she realized that the museum was again very conscious of the need to promote and collect works of Latin American art, and she rekindled her relationship with the museum, again rejoining the Board of Trustees. And in the past 2.5 years that I've been at the museum, she's given us 5 wonderful gifts that greatly enhance our collection of installation and video art, beginning with Alessandro Bartolo Yazbek's Unstable Mobile of 2006, continuing with Miguel Angel Rios' A Morir, or Till Death, of 2003, which is a 3-screen video projection, Melanie Smith's Paris 1, which is also a video work, of 2004, Victor Ripo's La Comida del Artista, which you may recognize. There's another edition of this piece at the Malva Fundación Constantini in Buenos Aires, as well as her Van Neuenschwander's piece, Mapamundi, that was created between 2005 and 2012. And it's interesting to note that Mrs. Hawley gave us the Van Neuenschwander piece after I had included it in the first show that I organized at the Phoenix Art Museum, which was called The Politics of Place, Latin American Photography, Past and Present. And this would begin a trend of Mrs. Hawley giving the museum works that we had already expressed interest in, such as several of the works that were included in the exhibition that Beverly Adams and I co-curated of the Hawley collection in 2012, entitled Order, Chaos, and the Space Between: Contemporary Latin American Art from the Diane and Bruce Hawley Collection. Excuse me. And 5 works included in this exhibition would be given to us as part of the list of promised gifts from the Hawleys, including Thomas Glassford's 9 Flat Mirror of 2001, Carlos Amorales' Black Cloud, which reappears here again, and consists of 25,000 black paper moss that will, after the Hawleys' passing, become part of the Phoenix Art Museum's collection, Luis Cruz Azaceta's Rafter Hell Act 2 of 1993, Jesus Soto's Untitled Plexiglass Cubes of 1970, and the Guillermo Cuita mattress piece I mentioned earlier. And the exhibition was a phenomenal success, arousing great interest in our community, especially among members of the Hispanic community and in the Hispanic press. And so too will the other 25 promised gifts that the Hollies have outlined for us as part of the request. And I should mention that of the 30 promised gifts, there are works by 13 artists from 6 countries, including 6 Mexican artists, 2 Cuban artists, 2 Venezuelan artists, an Argentine, a Chilean, and a Brazilian artist. And just to give you an example of some of these works, they include Julia Galan's Tijuana of 1987, another Thomas Glassford piece, the Doppler Redshift from the Partitura series, Daniela Rosel's photographs from the Ricas y Famosas series, another Amorales, his 06 vertical earthquake aftershock of 2010, a beautiful Jose Bedia, When I Left Havana of 1994, and a masterful Carlos Cruz Diez, Physichromy number 2378, which is a monumental, extraordinary work, as well as Alfredo Jaller's lightbox piece, The More Things Change, which actually includes images on the back of the lightboxes that can be seen in these gilded mirrors, as shown in this installation view, and Tungas Cadenchis Lacteos, which were shown at the museum in 1998 and which will hopefully become part of the museum's sculpture garden very soon. And these were accompanied by a suite of 6 drawings that are absolutely extraordinary. So as you can see, these promised gifts from the Hollies will fundamentally transform the Phoenix Art Museum's collection. They will give us a tremendous range in terms of chronology as well as geography, and they've effectively helped us to begin to build a momentum upon which we can continue to build the collection even further in the future. And the Hollies themselves have been extremely savvy about building their collection as a collage of works that can have a tremendous educational impact. As Mrs. Holly remarked in conversation with Maria Carmen Ramirez in 2007, quote, "Initially we went with whatever moved us or whatever we wanted to live with. Yet that has totally changed. Now it is more about the artists that represent the movements, the countries, or a specific period of time. We want to be certain to build from the foundation up. If you're really building a collection that has an educational component to it, you realize that you have to be serious in collecting those people that made the strongest impact in their time and place." And this emphasis on education illustrates Mrs. Holly's desire that the collection be made public in the future. And we'll see where it ends up. The envelope is still sealed on that front. But this emphasis on this educational impetus does dovetail with the Phoenix Art Museum's own mission, which is, quote, "to be a vibrant destination connecting people to great art from around the world to enrich their lives and communities, and fundamentally to educate and to inspire." And this brings us back to the beginning, to a museum that was founded before it had art to fill its galleries, to a museum whose collection fundamentally reflects the taste of its donors because they were the patrons who helped so kindly and generously in building up the collection, to a museum that inspires local audiences with diverse works of art from Latin America created in Mexico and beyond. And I would like to conclude with news about an important acquisition that I've made since I've been at the Phoenix Art Museum, as well as news of 3 important exhibitions that are coming up on our roster. And the acquisition that I will mention, as well as these exhibitions, serve to illustrate my own advocacy for continuing to open the museum up to art from all of Latin America, going beyond Mexico, as was the emphasis of our first 33 years of existence. And the acquisition involves almost 300 works of colonial art from the Viceroyalty of Peru from the 18th century, given to us as part of the Gary S. Culpeper bequest. And of the 71 paintings included in this bequest, about 35 are tremendously interesting, such as this beautiful Virgen de Pomata of the Cusco School, and I apologize for the bad photography. The Coronation of the Virgin by the Trinity, which is also Peruvian, 18th century. St. Bernard receiving the blood of Christ and the milk of the Virgin simultaneously, a very interesting painting. St. Christopher, which we have determined is actually from the Bolivian school, as well as these 2 saints, which are painted after Holguin, but are also the Peruvian school, as well as this Judgment of a Soul, which is a masterful work with these cryptic text boxes in both Spanish and Latin that I look forward to deciphering and placing in museum labels once we get it conserved, cleaned, and installed. Now, this gift also included 126 retablos, 81 carved wooden santos, 8 relicarios and 8 wooden domestic altars called oratorios. And the condition of the gift was that we accept all or nothing. And I thought that the caliber of these colonial paintings was worthy of accepting the entire gift and then deaccessioning undesirable objects in about 5 years, as best museum practices indicate. And finally, the exhibitions that we have coming up also manifest my own advocacy that we start to exhibit a more comprehensive view of art from Latin America, moving beyond the art of Mexico. And I'm so delighted to tell you that we will be taking the Antonio Berni, Juanito, and Ramona exhibition that Mari Carmen Ramirez of the MFA Houston and Marcelo Pacheco of the Malva Fundación Constantini in Buenos Aires organized. I hope that many of you had the chance to see it when it was in Houston. If not, it'll be in Phoenix from June 28th to September 21st. And the next exhibition, which opens in September, is an exhibition of the work of Pablo Bruschi called Pablo Bruschi, Art is Our Last Hope. And it was organized by Sergio Bessa of the Bronx Museum of the Arts, and it will be curated by me in its Phoenix iteration in September. And as Inga mentioned, I wrote part of my doctoral dissertation on Pablo Bruschi, so I'm thrilled to be able to bring this selection of works to Phoenix. And in conjunction with the Bruschi exhibition, I'm organizing a contemporary exhibition of mail art. What we did was to send out a call for international submissions of mail art. We sent about 1,500 invitations, and we are waiting to receive submissions that focus on the theme of art in Latin America. Art is Our Last Hope was the title of the show. And we've already received many submissions from around the world that deal with notions of utopia, dystopia, and the gray areas in between, as well as what it means to be an artist working in Latin America today. So this exhibition of contemporary mail art will effectively enable me to display Pablo Bruschi's historical mail art alongside more contemporary works to establish an international and trans-historical dialogue. So as you can see, with this international roster of exhibitions that are coming up, these exhibitions reflect the Phoenix Art Museum's expanded vision of art from Latin America, as well as its consistent engagement with and steadfast commitment to the collection, promotion, and display of art from Latin America, from Mexico, and beyond. Thank you.